Let's start off with all the different types of trigger nodes. Now, all workflows need to start somewhere, and that's where the trigger node comes in. It tells the workflow when to start, why it should start, and what information it should start with. So, jumping into a blank workflow, go ahead and click Add First Step, and the first thing you see is a bunch of trigger nodes here. Now we have here trigger manually, which means every time you click, it will run the workflow. Now that's great and all, but that's really only good for testing and things you're going to do not very often. Next, you have on-app event. Now, on-app event is whenever something happens in an app that you might use. It could be whenever you receive an email in your Gmail account. It could be whenever a task is updated in ClickUp, whenever a contact is added to HubSpot, or whenever pretty much anything happens in pretty much any app that anyone can connect to can cause a workflow to run. Outside of that, we have a schedule. Of course, this one makes sense. Run every day, run every Wednesday, run twice a week. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Next, we have on a webhook call. Now, I wanted to talk specifically about this node for a little bit and how to use it because I believe this is one of the most powerful nodes within N8N. Now, a webhook, for lack of better terms, is an API call. They are the same. Basically, what's happening is a server is contacting your N8N and saying, hey, something happened, here's some data. Then what N8N does with that data is ultimately up to you building the workflow. Webhooks can be hooked up to almost an infinite number of apps. And so if you don't find your app on the list of pre-made on-app event triggers, your next best bet is to go and look for your webhook node because chances are the service that you're using has some sort of webhook event that when something happens, it will automatically call N8N with some data. Now, in order to use the webhook, you're going to need the different URLs, right? Now, I always like to change the path. The only thing that this means is the name of the URL, right? So we're going to call it test. And there you can see right here at the end, it says test. Now there are different methods for this webhook, and this depends on the documentation of the service that you're going to be using, but it'll tell you 99% of the time it's going to be a post method, and then maybe 1% of the time it'll be a get method, and outside of that, the other methods you probably won't be using in a webhook with a webhook scenario. In terms of authentication, this means, do you want to authenticate anybody who's talking to your N8N account? Sometimes this is required through several webhooks, like Zoom for instance, whereas others don't require any authentication at all. Now, why this might be important is because you don't want some random guy on the internet sending a bunch of random data to your N8N causing it to error out. So sometimes it's good to put authentication there, even though a lot of times webhooks don't necessarily support it. This respond down here, for the most part, you guys won't be dealing with, at least when you're just starting out, so I would just completely ignore that. The other thing that you really need to know here, though, is you have a test URL and a production URL. There's a big difference. So if you use the test URL, then you have to click test workflow or listen for test event for this URL to work. Then later on, if you're like, okay, cool, well, let me turn on my workflow. And so you turn your workflow to active, right? Then what happens is you try the webhook and boom, it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Well, because you have a production URL. So when this is marked active, you need to use the production URL. And when this is inactive and you're just testing the workflow, you have to use the test URL. Now the test URL is a lot better for testing, for grabbing data. It's a lot easier to work with. So I do recommend that you use that when you're building out your workflows. Just remember when you go to a production environment and you activate your workflow, it's really important to switch to the production URL. After that, we have on form submission. Now this is one of my most favorite nodes here. Again, down here, if we go to add options and we go form path, we can give it a name. I'm going to call this one test to just demonstrate how this works. And here you can create a form just like a Google form that people can fill out. Some of the options here are going to be text, some will be dates. You can have drop downs. You can have people add files. It's really cool. So you can ask a plethora of questions, and basically it's just a questionnaire. Every time somebody submits this questionnaire, it will go through the automation going now. So let's make a quick questionnaire so that you guys can see how this works. Beautiful. So I put, what is the capital of Turkey? And again, remember, there is a test URL and a production URL. Test URL is only for testing. Production URL is when the workflow is active. It works exactly the same as the webhook. We can give the form a title. We can give it a description. We can set fields as required. And let's go ahead and test it out. And it brings out this beautiful looking form, and we can say what the capital of Turkey is. We'll go Chicago, which is completely wrong. It's Istanbul, but that's okay. Form is submitted. Wonderful. And then we can see we have some test data here that we can later use. Now, to show you guys what the authentication looks like really quick, I'm going to add a basic authentication, add a new credential. Let's add a username as test and password as test123. I'm going to click save. Test step, and the form's not going to show up this time because for some reason in N8N, when you've tested the form once, you have to refresh the page to test it again, or you can grab this URL, copy it, and put it in a new browser tab. Now, I want to show you something really quick. When you grab this and put it in a new browser tab, it's going to say it's not listening yet. You got to make sure you put test step, and then you click refresh, right? And then there we go. And we can see it's asking for authentication. But I'm going to decline this, and I'm going to show you guys that if you save it and then refresh the page here, and we jump back in the workflow and click test step, then the window pops up. And as you guys remember, it was test and then test 1, 2, 3, click sign in, and we can use the form. So that's some basic authentication so you can get rid of all those spammers out there that you don't want. All right, next we have when executed by another workflow. Now this one is really cool if you're working with very complex data models or multiple systems, or you just want to break things down a little bit more and be a little bit more organized. It is a little bit more complex to use. So you can have two things happen here. One, you can say execute sub workflow right here, put that here, and we can actually have the same workflow execute itself. So what do I mean by that? Well, for example, if we put a trigger manually here, I can have this workflow execute this up here. So I can technically save two workflows in one workflow. I could also save this, go over and create a new workflow, and then just say execute it on workflow in here, and keep them completely separate, and they'll still execute each other. All right, well, this is nice, but let me show you how this works. So you grab workflow from a list. We're going to go my workflow 3. We're going to run once with all items, and of course there's no items in there, right? So I'm going to give it an item. We're going to put an edit field. We're going to just say beautiful. So now we have some data, right? And this one is going to run this workflow up here. We're going to accept all data. This will automatically accept anything that gets in from here. And then if we click right here, test workflow, it'll go through there, and it's saying it has issues, which is beautiful. And we'll check and see what issues they have by clicking here. And there was an error right here. It says no items exist. And it's because I didn't save. So be sure to save it every time you change this node. And now let's test the workflow again, and it should work. And we can see nothing happened here. But if we go over to the executions, we can see that it did succeed, and it sent the data of name Austin to this workflow up here. That's really interesting. Next, we have a on chat message. Now, this is really good if you're working with some sort of AI. So anytime you chat here, it'll trigger the whole workflow here, whatever happens, which is nice. And you have a couple other triggers here. You can have a trigger whenever you receive an email, whenever an error happens, trigger when a file changes on your server. And the rest of these 3 down here are for some more advanced use cases, so I would just ignore those for now.